The third key element of the Withdrawal Agreement is what it provides for the island of Ireland. The only land border between the UK and the EU is now on the island of Ireland, between Northern Ireland, which is part of the United Kingdom, and the Republic of Ireland, which is a member state of the European Union. This created a conundrum for the negotiation of the Withdrawal Agreement, encapsulated in this meme, which was circulating on social media in the post-referendum period. How can Ireland be both in the single market and the customs union as an EU member state, and Northern Ireland be also in that space, but Great Britain cannot be? The idea is to suggest that this isn't a problem that can be solved. If you don't know anything about the history of Northern Ireland, and many English people do not, please do a little bit of research and inform yourself. There's a good explainer here in the hyperlink, or you can find other sources on the internet. Peace in Northern Ireland is based on, among other things, European Union money and free movement across that border under the Common Travel Area, which predates European Union law, and the Good Friday Agreement, which incorporates cooperation and working together in many areas across the Northern Ireland Republic of Ireland border. It is based on an open border. If the European Union and Northern Ireland are in a different customs union and not in the single market, there legally has to be a hard border between them to make sure that the correct customs formalities are carried out and to ensure that regulatory standards are met for products or services crossing the border. A hard border is a frontier monitored and protected by customs officials and border inspectors, and potentially police or military personnel if there are security concerns around that border. The problem for the island of Ireland is that a return of a hard border would be so unacceptable to the people whose lives cross that border, sometimes many times a week, or even many times even in a day. So unacceptable that it would lead to civil disobedience and potentially even violence. Hoped for technological solutions, smart recognition of transport vehicles and consignments and so on, are not sufficiently developed, or are perhaps a fantasy of something that will never be sufficiently developed. Reports first started circulating in December 2017 of a draft leaked agreement to the effect that laws in Northern Ireland would remain aligned with the European Union so that there is no hard border. Scotland's First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, was quick to ask for the same deal for Scotland as on offer for Northern Ireland. The Withdrawal Agreement makes provision for the island of Ireland. It's important to distinguish between the Prime Minister May version and the Prime Minister Johnson version. There are some really good explainers of the May version and the Johnson version, which is embodied in the Withdrawal Agreement, of course, and the explainer on the slide is the place where I would suggest that you start. Just to explain for a minute what this land border between the EU and the UK means in practice. Let me illustrate the difficulties of the land border and how much infrastructure investment there would need to be with a standard hard border using this picture. We know that thousands of people cross the Republic of Ireland, Northern Ireland border each day. We know that the workforce on the island of Ireland in many sectors on the island is effectively one workforce. Healthcare is a good example. We know that some services like children's heart surgery are only available in Dublin. The Belfast unit was closed down as part of the collaborations in health between the two countries that fall within the broad parameters of the Good Friday Agreement. Peace is built on there not being a meaningful border there. So in the first picture on the left-hand side, you see two road signs, a directions sign and a delimit speed sign. These two road signs are in different countries. So where in the picture would you put the border crossing? Now take a look at the second picture on the right-hand side. If you go past the delimit sign and then take a right, you would have to immediately cross the border again. There are 499 kilometres of this border, with many, many such crossings. The nearly 500-kilometre border between Carlingford Lough and Lough Foyle is the only land border between the UK and the EU post-Brexit. The 1998 Belfast Agreement or Good Friday Agreement brought peace in Northern Ireland and removed the need for checks along the border. The border is currently invisible and neither side wants the return of infrastructure on the border or a hard border, staffed by customs officials or police or military personnel. People in Ireland are accustomed to being able to cross the border easily. If that is removed, there may be anger or violence, and then police or military personnel might have to be reinstated to secure order at the border. As I said, the worry is thus that the return of a hard border would mean an end to peace in Northern Ireland. The UK and the EU agreed in a political deal in December 2017 that a backstop would be required in the Withdrawal Agreement that would guarantee an invisible border in the event of no other solution to achieve this being found in a Brexit deal, either in a specific solution for Northern Ireland or in a broader EU-UK trade deal. In March 2018, the two sides agreed that there had to be a legal text, not just a political declaration, around how this option would work in practice should no better option be found. The original Theresa May Withdrawal Agreement included a protocol on Northern Ireland which included this backstop. The May backstop was a legally binding guarantee that whatever happened during the negotiations between the EU and the UK on the future relationship, the open border between Ireland and Northern Ireland would be maintained and the Good Friday Agreement respected. The backstop in the May Agreement was often described as an all-weather insurance policy. The May backstop didn't just cover Northern Ireland, but it also provided for a UK-wide customs union with the EU, covering all goods except for fish. The May approach was not acceptable to the Johnson government. In October 2019, Johnson renegotiated the Northern Ireland Protocol. The new protocol contains very different arrangements. As Professor Steve Wetherill explains, and I will be basing much of this part of the lecture on his blog post, the Northern Ireland Protocol is a very tricky legal text to understand. What it says is not what it does. So what does the Northern Ireland Protocol say and what does it do? Here is part of its preamble. The Good Friday or Belfast Agreement is a peace agreement between the British and Irish governments and most of the political parties in Northern Ireland on how Northern Ireland should be governed. The talks leading to the agreement addressed issues which had caused armed conflict and significant loss of life during previous decades. The aim was to establish a new devolved government for Northern Ireland, in which unionists, supporters of the United Kingdom and Northern Ireland remaining within it, and Irish nationalists would share power. On the constitutional question of whether Northern Ireland should remain in the UK or become part of a united Ireland, it was agreed that there would be no change without the consent of the majority. This is called the principle of consent. Majority opinion in the future could be tested by referendum. The Good Friday Agreement sought to build relationships within Northern Ireland, between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland, and between Britain and Ireland. It is divided into three strands. Strand 1 set up the Power Sharing Assembly and Executive. Strand 2 established an Irish dimension to the governing arrangements for Northern Ireland. The North-South institutions, the North-South Ministerial Council, and the North-South implementation bodies encourage cooperation that benefits both Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. This is important for nationalists. And Strand 3 established East-West institutions, the British Irish Council and the British Irish Intergovernmental Conference, to encourage cooperation and develop good relations between Britain and Ireland. These are forums where the two governments discuss reserved matters which are not the responsibility of the Northern Ireland Assembly. The thing is, many activities, particularly under Strand 2, were made significantly easier because the UK and Ireland were both member states of the EU. The Northern Ireland Protocol protects the common travel area. This is a free movement arrangement between the UK and Ireland for their citizens, and only their citizens, with reciprocal and associated rights. The revised Northern Ireland Protocol, the revised Northern Ireland Protocol, Article 3, and the political declaration in Article 54 expressly allows for the UK and Ireland to continue with and develop the common travel area, subject to fully respecting the EU law rights of natural persons. As the common travel area is a bilateral agreement that predates British and Irish accession to the EU, it did not require the consent of the 27 EU member states to stay in place. The common travel area was not written down as an agreement per se until a Memorandum of Understanding was signed in May 2019 between the British and Irish governments. And it remains a legally non-binding and flexible arrangement to which both governments have expressed their commitment. Goodwill is critical for its ongoing operation. The reciprocal rights listed in the Memorandum of Understanding are rights to work or be self-employed, to social protection, to social housing, education, and voting rights in parliamentary and local elections. The common travel area does not apply to EU 26 nationals. On the customs point, while the May government backstop would have kept the UK in a customs union with the EU, the Johnson Withdrawal Agreement sees the whole of the UK, including Northern Ireland, leave the EU customs union. In legal terms, Northern Ireland remains part of the UK customs territory. Northern Ireland will be included in UK free trade agreements. In practice, however, Northern Ireland will apply many EU customs rules, and there will effectively be a customs and regulatory border between Great Britain and Northern Ireland in the Irish Sea. As Steve Wetherill puts it, so the protocol says that Northern Ireland is part of the customs territory of the United Kingdom, Article 4, but that is not what it does. De facto, Northern Ireland is part of the EU's customs territory. The new arrangements are permanent, and provided ongoing consent is given under the terms of the protocol, coming to that in a minute, they are no longer a backstop, i.e. an insurance policy which will only come into effect if other measures fail to keep the Irish border open. What about regulatory standards? EU laws on the single market continue to apply to Northern Ireland. This is found in Article 5.4 as listed and identified in the second appendix to the protocol. These regulatory standards are a long list, and it includes the vast majority of EU law on the free movement of goods. So even after the end of transition, products produced on the whole island of Ireland have to comply with EU regulatory standards, for example, licensing rules for medicines and vaccines, to ensure their safety and efficacy. Northern Ireland, a part of the UK, is legally locked into the whole ecosystem of EU internal market law on goods, its rules, how they're interpreted, and how they're implemented. But Great Britain, the rest of the UK, will no longer be bound by these rules. So it logically follows that there will have to be checks on products coming into Northern Ireland from Great Britain to make sure that they comply with EU rules. Otherwise, the integrity of the EU's internal market would be compromised. The protocol does not give detail on how these regulatory checks will take place. This is being worked out now, and it's far from simple. The protocol says that it protects the integrity of the UK's internal market, the market comprising Northern Ireland, England, Scotland, and Wales. But actually, unless the UK decides unilaterally to track the EU's regulatory standards for goods, that will not be its practical effect. Because where Northern Irish products diverge from Great British products, there will be a need for checks to secure regulatory compliance. Back to Steve Wetherill again. The protocol says that it is dedicated to the protection of the UK internal market in Article 6, but that is not what it does. The revised protocol allows the Northern Ireland Assembly to provide consent for certain EU regulations continuing in Northern Ireland. The first vote will take place 4 years after the end of the transition period and every 4 years thereafter if passed by a simple majority. If endorsed on a cross-community basis, then the period would be every 8 years. If rejected, the regulations will cease to apply after 2 years. Under the Northern Ireland Protocol, the European Commission and the European Court of Justice will have jurisdiction to enforce EU rules in Northern Ireland. This is another way in which the jurisdiction of the Court of Justice of the EU over a part of the UK continues after the end of transition. However, in practice, UK bodies will often be tasked with enforcement duties on the ground. The European Commission will have wide-ranging rights to ask for information and intervene in the way UK enforcement bodies are acting. Article 4 of the previous protocol has now been removed. Annex 4, not Article 4. It contained references to EU laws and international conventions that would apply to the whole UK in what were called level playing field commitments. The EU wanted these in the protocol in order to limit the UK's capacity to gain what the EU would see as an unfair advantage by lowering standards. This is of particular concern due to the UK's close geographical proximity to the EU, but also because in the previous backstop arrangements, the UK would have been in a single customs territory with the EU, meaning tariff-free trade. The EU therefore would not have been able to use tariffs to compensate for any competitive advantage gained by the UK through lowering standards of regulation. The level playing field provisions were in the areas of taxation, environmental protection, labour standards, state aid and competition. But the UK will no longer be in a single customs territory or union with the EU. So the legally binding level playing field provisions have now been replaced by less specific and non-binding commitments in a political declaration to uphold such principles in any future trade agreement between the EU and the UK. As I'm writing this lecture and speaking to you, we don't know whether such an agreement will be agreed. There are bespoke governance arrangements for the Northern Ireland Protocol, including a specialist committee under the Withdrawal Agreement on its implementation. The main aim of these provisions is to ensure that the EU market is protected from goods coming from the UK or via the UK into the EU.